I'm Lisa Snyderman, and this is Conversations on Creating to Heal. Today, I'm thrilled to be speaking with Cashel in New York, New York, an author of Suffering the Silence, Chronic Lyme Disease in an Age of Denial, and also president and co-founder of Suffering the Silence community. And hers is a story of recognizing the power of sharing her own illness story and encouraging others to do the same. So welcome, Allie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I think first, I would love to have you maybe talk about, I said you're an author of a book and that you're also a president and co-founder of a community. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what this community is and if you have a mission or a purpose as personal and also as the co-founder of the community.
Sure, thank you. I think in many ways, my personal mission and the mission of the organization are really tied up together. The Suffering the Silence community is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to using art, media, and storytelling to break the stigma and raise awareness around the living experience of chronic illness and invisible disability. So we use many different kinds of art, sometimes photography, film, storytelling, to help people find their own voice and sort of speak up against a lot of the feelings of stigma or isolation that come along with these experiences.
I want to launch into your transformation story. Can you talk a little bit about the events that may have led up to your illness and maybe in ways that have most significantly transformed you?
Sure. So I was actually first diagnosed with Lyme disease when I was 8 years old. It may not seem like it, but I'm 27 now. And it's been quite a long time, over 2 decades now since all of that happened. When I was 18, so almost exactly 10 years ago this month, actually, I experienced my first neurological symptoms of Lyme disease and was told by some of the best doctors in the world that the symptoms that I was suffering from and the disease that I was suffering from was not real, that it was in my head, that all of my symptoms were sort of a psychological manifestation rather than a physical manifestation. And what that effect that had on me was that I started to doubt sort of my own conception of my experience of illness. I questioned what was real, what wasn't real in my own way. And I ended up not talking about it with my friends, with my family. I was too sort of afraid to speak up about what I thought was going on in my body. And that silence shaped a huge part of my life and a huge part of the way that I thought about myself. And it wasn't until I started writing a little bit about my Lyme experience and talking to other people who had had Lyme and saw that they had had so many of the same experiences that I was able to sort of find my voice and ultimately write my own story and help other people to do the same.
For people who aren't familiar with what it's like to live with Lyme, talk a little bit about that. And it doesn't have to be your day-to-day, but just give people a picture of what that is like so that they can, put themselves in your shoes.
So life with Lyme, one of the really challenging things is that it looks different for everyone. Some people have severe fatigue, severe pain, severe neurological dysfunction. There were times in my life where I was living with all of those in sort of singular instances or all of those at once. But for me, I think what's the hardest thing about Lyme is that most of the medical profession is in a real sort of conflict about what Lyme actually is, how long it can last in the system, whether or not neurological Lyme can last with antibiotic treatment, and sort of that fissure in the medical world creates a lot of doubt and a lot of stigma around the Lyme experience that other chronic illnesses don't necessarily have with the same sort of political and aggressive feel.
So how did this propel you or interest you in starting Suffering the Silence? Talk a little bit about the need for the organization and what you've done with it since you started it.
Yeah, so a huge part of the book is sharing other stories. It shares my stories, but I also conducted a series of interviews with patients from all over the world and share their stories as well. And in the process of collecting those stories and compiling them together, I realized how powerful it is when multiple people come together and speak up about their experiences. And I wanted to replicate that in some way. And then right ahead of the publication, one of my very best friends from high school, Erica Lupinacci, we started talking about our experiences. She lives with lupus, and we realized that we never, even though we were sick at the same time in high school, we never talked to each other about what it was that was going on. And once we had opened those conversations, like opened the floodgates, we realized that despite the differences in our diagnoses, our experiences were very much the same. We felt a lot of isolation. We felt a lot of not fitting in or not being seen or not being understood. And we had this realization that this could go much bigger than Lyme. Collecting these patient stories, empowering people to speak up together, regardless of diagnosis, could really change the way that people are thinking about illness in general. And so we sort of set out together. We're both creative people, so we set out to use art to do just that.
Gosh, I love it. I resonate so strongly. And it sounds like you're making such a big impact, in the community. So for you, was writing something that you gravitated towards naturally, or was it something that you had already been doing?
I never really considered myself to be a writer. I was always a big reader, and I found a lot of strength in other people's writing. And I was also very into theater, so I found a lot of strength in other people's work for a long time. And I was studying writing and literature at college and was encouraged to start to write about my own experience. And that sort of gentle push, I think, is really what helped me to find my written voice as well as my vocal voice in this whole experience.
What is it about the experience of writing? How has that helped you in some ways process? And maybe it's both the creating and also the sharing of that. So maybe talk a little bit about how writing and then also sharing that with others has helped you and others heal.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question, because I think that the process of creating art, regardless of whether it's written or visual art or performance art, is such a huge part of the actual process of then bringing it to the rest of the world. For me, writing helped me see that things had actually happened. It was sort of self-affirming. Like if I had written it down, or if somebody had told me something and then I was able to write it down, I could say, I made this happened to me, this is my experience, I don't need to question it, it's something that exists separate from me and separate from my consciousness. And I think being able to have this piece of paper or this Word document or ultimately this book really helped me come to terms and accept the full everything about my experience was really helpful. And then sharing it helped me realize that other people had that experience too, which took a lot of the fear away.
Yeah, I'm in a place right now where I'm in a similar journey, just at a different place than you are. I'm just finishing the memoir, so and just about to release it. So I'm in that same place of how writing it was very cathartic, and a lot of different things came up, just like you're talking about, that wouldn't have come up if I didn't put that on paper. So I
for sure.
totally hear you.
Yeah, I also, a huge part of my experience is that I had a lot of memory holes, like things that I just had absolutely no memory of. And knowing that I had to write about it forced me to ask my family or reach out to doctors and say, like, what happened here? And just sort of fill in those holes. And that process of having this sort of creative piece that I was working on facilitated much needed healing conversations that I wasn't ready to have before I started writing.
So I want to invite you to share it sounds like some of your book,
Sure.
Maybe some passage that has particular meaning to you, and then perhaps talk a little bit about why you shared that passage.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Okay. I have both witnessed and experienced the benefit of pushing through the fear of breaking the silence. With surprisingly few exceptions, when I share my story with others, I see empathy on their faces. While the social dismissal of illness is real, and medical dismissal sometimes even stronger force, I'm happy to report that on an individual scale, empathy is not impossible to find. And as that empathy builds, as that one-on-one faith and understanding becomes stronger, I truly believe the living experience of chronic Lyme patients will improve.
Empathy.
Yeah, I think empathy is one of the things that has been the most healing force for me, and realizing that empathy exists in places that I assumed it was absent, or I assumed that I would be met with a more aggressive or hostile energy. finding it in those places has really sort of restored my idealism and optimism. And I think that if we put ourselves out there more often than not, we'll be lifted up. And I think every time you do that, there's this chance that you won't be met with that empathy. And it's a risk, and you will face that risk every time you speak up, every time you tell your story. And sometimes you're going to get the bad guys who can't hear you in that moment. I don't think they're bad guys, but maybe for whatever it is, like, they can't hear you. But for the most part, I think when we make ourselves vulnerable, other people will do the same. And that's been shaped the way that I live my whole life. And I didn't have that before I experienced illness, before I started STS. And it's really carrying me through, I think.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I definitely relate in a similar way. As an artist, it's really easy to kind of give people that artist persona, and to be able to allow yourself to be vulnerable and share. It's an opening, right?
Yep.
It enables others to share their stories. I want you to read one more paragraph because I realized how short that was.
So I truly believe the living experience of chronic Lyme patients will improve. For that, policy needs to change. Doctors needs to treat. Tests needs to be reliable. Full treatment needs to be available. And now that affordable healthcare is still a topic in the air, an unfinished story, insurance companies need to realize that in the long run, it will be cheaper for them to let Lyme patients get the support they need from the beginning. In order for that to happen, however, the Lyme community needs the support of the public. We can earn that support by continuing to share our stories. With the power of words, spoken, written, posted, emails, the narratives of the Lyme community can change the experience of future patients. Every day, I work to break my own silence, to share a little more about what it means to have lived with this disease, to have been treated by doctors in the way that I have. The more I share, the more faith I have in the power of that sharing. Our collective chronic Lyme voice is growing. Before long, it will be too loud to ignore. For every disbeliever, I hope there will be at least one new believer. When they talk, I hope someone else hears them. I hope they too will want to share our stories, having learned something new about the way that some of us move through this world. And for the first time, I think there might be a chance for what happens in my imagination to see itself leap into reality. I like to imagine this conversation as a new infection, an idea that is so contagious that once someone is exposed to it, they can't help but pass it along.
I love that. It's very uplifting.
Thank you.
You bring up some really important things there. And it sounds like, so just really quickly, what has the impact been? Have you gotten responses from people who have read the book, joined the community? What kinds of, messages are you receiving?
Yeah, we receive messages all the time about people who have spoken up, people who have published their stories either in the book or on the website, who have been part of our photo projects, and they are consistently positive and empowered messages that we're receiving back. People are happy to have participated in this, they're happy to have spoken up, and they feel, in many ways, I think the same feeling of healing that we feel through creating that art. They become a piece of a much bigger project that we all are helping to sort of shape and shift cultural perspective around this. And I think that is super empowering and helps give a little purpose to the suffering as well.
Yes, I was just thinking that it gives some meaning, and instead of just focusing on illness, it allows you to do something that you feel like you're contributing in a positive way, giving yourself worth or value.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So before we go, I just wanted to ask if you might have any life lessons that maybe others who are going through something similar would benefit from.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think back to when I was at my sickest, and even now when I have hard days, it's so important for me to sort of take a step back and create something. And that at different times of my life has been I've been able to do very little at times, and sometimes I've been able to do much more. And I think regardless of where you are in your physical journey, if all you're able to do is sit up from your bed and snap a picture of your bedroom scene or whatever it is, capture and record your experience, because you will find something in it and learn something in it as you go. And you'll find victories, I think, along the way, and sort of see your progress, whether that be good progress or bad progress. We're all sort of on this journey and moving through it together. And I think the more we can capture that, the stronger as a community as a whole will be.
So capture and record your progress, maybe celebrate your mini milestones.
Totally.
And yeah. Well, thank you so much, Allie. And
Thank you.
those words, I appreciate you coming on to Conversations on Creating to Heal.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.